Welcome back to the Mk4 garage, everybody. I'm going to show you how to adjust your sway bars today, because I think a lot of folks just bolt them in and they don't really think about what a sway bar does and how it reacts to your initial setup on the sway bars themselves. All right, so we just got finished corner weighting this Mk4 prototype is what we're calling it. And I was bolting the sway bars back in place because, of course, to corner weight the car, you want to make sure that you're not adding weight from one side to the other because you're binding against the actual sway bar. So one side or the other has to get disconnected. It doesn't matter which side, as long as the two sides aren't coupled together when you're doing your corner weight. You can see I've still got the scales under here. But as I was bolting this back in, I thought it'd be a good idea to go over how to set up your sway bars and how to adjust them so that they are in the neutral position as you actually tighten them down, ready to hit the road. So as I pulled this one out, there was no pressure on the actual sway bar itself. It was in the neutral position, meaning there was no weight bearing on it, either up or down from the other side of the car, transferring through the sway bar. And that's the way it should be. But we had to put a few turns into the coilover on this side to increase the pressure that the right rear tire put down on the ground. And if you want an explanation of that, go back to the last video where we corner weighted the car. So as I was bolting this back in, I noticed that the holes that the upper mount for the sway bar go in, because this is where I disconnected it, did not line up. Well, makes sense. You know, we put, I think when all was said and done, I put 3 turns in, we took about a turn and a half out. So we put a turn and a half into the pressure on the coil spring on this side of the car. There was just enough pressure on that sway bar end link that it did not want to go in, or the bolt did not want to go through the frame to bolt it in. So what I ended up doing is I ended up loosening the bottom nut and the top nut on the adjuster. I spun the adjuster just a little bit to add some length to the adjuster, to the end link, and I got it to where the bolt lines up. Now, you only need to adjust it on one side. Whether you make the end link shorter or longer, you only have to do it on one side. Kind of like when I told you about corner weighting, you only need to adjust one corner, unless your ride height is way off, and then that's a whole different story. But you only have to adjust one side, so you don't have to go from this side to that side and come back, and all you've got to do is adjust it on one side. One side needs to be fixed in position, and the other side needs to be adjusted so that there is no pressure on the sway bar when it's in the neutral position. Now, this means that you have to have already set your ride height at the very minimum and check your tire pressures. Now, we did all that before we corner weighted the car. We want to make sure we do that before we corner weight the car, and that carries through over into our front end alignment. We want to make sure that the tire pressures are correct going into our wheel alignment. That's why we corner weight the car first, because the alignment really doesn't change the corner weights of the car. So once all that's done, now you can get your sway bars adjusted and put them in the neutral position. You do not want your sway bar to bind as you're trying to get that bolt through to mount it. Like in this case, we've taken the front sway bar loose and we've taken the rear sway bar loose in this car, and we want to make sure that they go back in the neutral position. So in the back here, what I did is, like I said, I made this longer, and then once it was all put back together, I want to make sure that, see this? It'll move back and forth. There's no weight bearing on this that is going to make this be compressed or extended. So just the fact that we can move it back and forth in the bottom tells me that it's in the neutral position. And the fact that you can turn it readily. Now, these are rod ends and they will spin on their Teflon lining. However, they should be in a position where they're not tight. So this one moves on the bottom, and so it's good. And then you can go ahead and you can verify the same thing on the other side. Now keep in mind, we did nothing on this other side to change it. This is right where it was from the beginning, but it's the same thing. It'll move back and forth here. And that means it's in the neutral position, meaning there is no undue stress on that sway bar while the car sits on a level piece of ground, meaning this is in the neutral position as it sits on the level ground, or in this case, the level lift. So let me get under the car and I'll show you exactly how we are going to make sure that the front sway bar is also in the neutral position. All right, this is worth pointing out because I pulled this apart and man, it was a booger to get apart. I didn't think much of it until I went to put it back in, and then I could not get it to go back into the bolt and into the neutral position. I don't think it was ever neutral. Right now you can see I can get the bolt in and out without any issue, and that's where it should be. Now both sides are somewhat disconnected. This side only has the bolt through it right there. Over on the other side, you can see because of the way this is mounted, right? The bolt is coming straight through the sway bar, but I can't get this, the two end links to go far enough to line up with the bolt. And that's a problem. So the problem is that this washer on the problem is that the washer that's on here holding the end link onto the shock bolt won't come far enough back to line up with the bolt, and so it's never going to be right. So what I had to do on the other side, and I've seen this before on other cars, is I had to add a spacer in between that washer and the nut so that that end link will pivot far enough back and have free rein to align with the actual sway bar. So keep this in mind when you bolt this stuff together, guys. If it's not going together and you're like beating things, you know, with a hammer or having to really force things to go together, stop, see why you're having problems, and then figure out a solution, or go onto one of the Facebook pages or a forum, or even send me an email or a text, and I'll see if I can help you through it. But this was not installed properly to begin with, and there was so much binding in the sway bar that there would have been issues down the line. You know, these bolts, you know, they're grade 5 bolts, but they're not meant to be put in that amount of stress from the get-go and then have to deal with all of the sway bar action on top of that. So if it doesn't go in and it's binding to start with, there's a problem. Stop, take a look, find out what the problem is, and then address it. All right, so you can see on this one I've got a spacer in there, and I didn't do the flat washer on this side, and I've got a lot more movement on this side than I have on the other side. So I think I'm going to go back to the passenger side and I'm going to remove that flat washer that I've got right there. I'm just going to pull that out, and so I'll give us a little bit more articulation on that rod end and put it all back together, and then I'll bring it back when I'm adjusting everything in order to get it set to neutral. All right, so we've got the bolt just loosely on there. This is what you want to see. You want to be able to move this back and forth. So it's in the neutral position. It's not binding. It's not held up on anything. And if you can do that, then it's time to go ahead and tighten the bolt down. The other side is already bolted down, and one side has to be bolted down while you're checking to make sure everything lines up on the other side and that you don't have any binding. Once you're positive that you don't have any binding, you can go ahead, you can run that nut down and tighten everything up. I'd like to thank you all for watching. If you are enjoying the content here, as always, do the like, the share, the subscribe, all that kind of stuff. We'll see you next time. Have a great day.